Yeah. Coming
Back
out,
at it.
coming out today. Back in the movie minds.
Just coming, right off of a talk on licorice pizza, and
That's
now
right.
we're just
right.
going right back into
just
it.
for continuity's sake. If you really want to get the full
I mean, that's why we're wearing
Kyle-
the same exact thing.
Kyle, yeah, we should run a costume change. Just to get the full Kyle and Ben experience, definitely watch Licorice Pizza first, just so you can we don't want to do things out of continuity.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is Up-to-Date Cinephile.
Up-to-Date Cinephile. Yeah, we didn't even say the name of the show last episode, but that, whatever.
Whatever, they can read.
They can read.
They can read
Ben Thelen from Dead Reckoner Podcast. I'm Kyle Bruehl from I Know Movies and You Don't. This is our now up-to-date week. We're going to talk about two movies that came out just this last weekend.
Keeping you up to date on the world of cinephilia.
Yeah, cinephilia. It is.
And maybe other kind. I mean, there's a lot of love in these movies. We're going to talk about this week. There's a lot of philia. There's a lot of feel you up.
There's a lot of that too.
And so we're gonna get sexy. This is sexy hour. This is sexy time. Bong chicka wow here on Up-to-Date Cinephile.
Absolutely.
We're talking about Wolf. We're talking about Benedetta. We're gonna start with Wolf. We're gonna do our spoiler-free review of Wolf.
Yeah. So Wolf.
So what's your animal?
Oh, what's my animal?
So
it's funny. We talked about that last night.
If we get institutionalized, you and I, in the Center for, what do they call it? This species. It's like body dysmorphia, but it's like species dysmorphia.
Species dysmorphia.
What animal are you gonna? What animal? Well, no. How about this? How about we do each other's? What animal am I gonna be?
You.
This could get dicey.
This could get dicey, but I think you would be a sloth bear.
A sloth bear, yeah, that's about right. That's about right. I was gonna go with some sort of bear. Let me think about it though. Maybe like maybe a bear, maybe a raccoon. Like it's just rummaging through the cultural detritus, of America. That's what you do. I mean, you rummage. You're a rummager through. Because
this is an interesting thing. We are because conceptually speaking, this is an interesting, and the comparisons are so apt, are going to be present in talking about Wolf, because the same conversation comes up when you talk about Yorgos Lanthimos' The Lobster. Is what animal do you choose if you cannot find yourself as a partner? Yeah. They turn you into an animal, and he chooses the lobster. So the animal that I always say that I would be, and Katie asked me the same exact question, what animal do you think you would be if
you could choose?
If you could choose, and I said
turn into an actual animal.
To actual animal, I said otter.
Otter would be fun. I would think like an eagle or something like that. I want to fly. Like, you
want to fly?
Let me do something interesting, right? Let me do something I couldn't othermorse do.
Oh man, I can't
soar through the air.
I can't float very well, so maybe that's.
Well, but you're changing. You're transmorphing. So spoiler-free review of Wolf.
So Wolf is from the mind of Nathalie Biancheri. I don't know.
She's Nathalie.
Nathalie.
Hello, I'm Nathalie.
Biancheri.
She's actually played in a biopic by Jared Leto.
Yes, that
Hello, I am Nathalie.
So
I sold my shares in the movie Wolf at Gucci.
Yes,
I'm never gonna stop. I have to think of the right year-end award to give the Gucci movie.
The House of Gucci.
It's best. It's
different.
That's why I'm gonna have to think about it. Yeah. It's not just an award that's like good or bad or best, costume. It's going to require a very specific. I think I know what the award is, but I'm going to save that for when we're handing out awards.
It's interesting. I have comparative notes when we get into Benedetta on our conversation of House of Gucci on how you do camp correctly.
Europeans are fucking wild, man. They do different shit over there.
Absolutely. Again, a European sensibility to House of Gucci. Aces. It would have been great. It would have been fantastic.
So Wolf. Wolf is about the guy who thinks he's a wolf. I mean, that's what it's about. And a girl who thinks she's some sort of a jungle cat.
I mean, it's definitely allegory of gay conversion camps, which I think it misses the mark just a little bit because of that. It's interesting because watching Wolf, I did not hate the movie. I did not think it was a bad movie, but I definitely think it missed most of the opportunities it set out for itself. I feel like it aspired to be something of a commentary, aspired to be something of sort of an ambiguity about the idea of whether you are naturally something versus whether you are nurtured or natured into something, because he is natured. I think the movie sort of aims.
Yeah, his parents definitely didn't make him a wolf. They're boring AF.
Yeah, no, and everybody else.
If I had those parents, I'd be like, sure, I'm a fucking wolf.
Yeah.
Give me anything.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm bored.
Yeah, I'm bored. I just need to do something else. I need to be something else entirely.
Mom and Dad, I'm going in a new direction. Let me tell you about it.
And because he is definitely, and it's interesting because if it is about gay conversion therapy or this idea of being who you claim to be or being out of body of sorts, and that
by the way, I just want to flag, like, I think I don't know if it's about gay conversion therapy exactly or whatever. I hadn't even thought about that. It's a perfectly plausible reading.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that I didn't have that thought. It's definitely about, like, I guess it's just about, I saw it more as just be like people trying to force you to conform to whatever.
Yeah,
but it definitely does take
oppression.
Yeah, it definitely does take the form of, not so much pray the gay away, because it doesn't really have any religious overtones.
No, it's definitely
but it's just like, you gotta,
The method is actually like, I'm gonna make you be exactly what you want to be, and hopefully that will make you realize that you are not that thing.
You're not
a squirrel. You're not a parrot. Like, you can't fly, you can't climb like a squirrel. Like, these are the methods of Paddy Considine, who plays the lead professor, lead therapist, for this interesting, though weirdly, I guess not implausible. I mean, you hear a lot of dysmorphia tales. People who think that they are children. People who think that they are.
Yeah, I mean, watch that
aliens,
terrible show,
like,
whatever. What is it, Obsessed, where the person eats their couch or thinks they're having sex with roller coasters. Yeah,
I'm sure this exists.
Certainly, I mean, if you have, we live on a planet of whatever 7-8 billion people. You roll a lot of dice. A few of them are going to come up with some interesting results.
I think
right?
so.
So. But I mean, we're not supposed to think that this is real, right? I mean, this is not like an attempt at like a social realism vis-a-vis weird ass therapies. Whatever's going on in this movie, I agree with you that it is completely allegorical. This is not meant to be a depiction. This isn't like we're watching Awakening. This isn't meant to be.
This is not Boy Erased.
This is not like an attempt to be like a depiction of a thing that's actually happening somewhere in more or less the same way. Right?
No.
That is not what this is. Whatever it is, it's not that.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, this is the main problem I have with the movie, is that it's loaded with some ideas, not a lot followed through, and
not a lot followed through.
Not really followed through at all. Yeah, that's generous.
That is generous.
Not followed through at all, really, and the tone is what's wrong with this movie. The tone is what sets.
Well, there's a couple things wrong with the movie. But the tone is. I agree with you that the tone is not, doesn't work.
Yeah, had the tone been satirical, had the tone been
or even had any level to it at all.
Yeah, this is more dour, dreary.
It's just all dour. Like you would expect there to be a range of responses. You would expect there to be a range of behavior. You'd expect people to be fucking. You'd expect some of them to be sad, some of them to be happy, some of them to be defiant, some of them to be whatever. They're all the same. They all have the same kind of dour attitude.
Yeah.
The whole thing is
whether you're a horse or a panda, they're all the same.
Everyone is kind of reluctantly participating, right? That's nobody
minus the German Shepherd. That's the only one.
Yeah, he's into it.
Yeah, because he's a dog.
Yeah, he's into it. But everyone is like kind of reluctantly participating or slightly resisting, but not in any really interesting way. It's very level, right? Everyone seems to be having more or less the same response, and the movie maintains more or less the same tone throughout.
Yeah,
right, which becomes a real problem because it just feels so flat.
Yes.
What you would expect to have, like I said, you would just expect there to be a range of attitudes, right, and a range of responses.
Yeah.
Right, and it just feels so flat.
Yeah.
It feels flat in every.
This
movie is flat in every dimension.
Yeah.
Right, because the plot is flat. You cannot spoil this movie because nothing happens.
That's true. Yeah.
You can't spoil it. No, there is no surprise.
Yeah.
Nobody does anything out of character. Nobody does anything interesting. Nobody does anything, really, except what you expect them to do. Yeah. There are a few cases where I guess you could say, well, it could go one way or the other way at the end, and whatever. So, yeah, I think everything you're saying is right. This movie... But I found this... There are a few things that are very good about this movie, that are done... I wouldn't say they're executed very well. I think the premise is interesting enough as it goes. They don't really take it anywhere.
They don't take it anywhere, but it's an interesting premise.
An interesting enough premise. I thought that some of the visual choices in the movie were really great. Like, I think the movie, like, the way that she uses kind of mise-en-scène, like, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the frame.
The framing is one of its strongest suits. So when they find a really good place to sit the camera, they make it very interesting. It's when they start intercutting and they cut away from those. Like, you're like...
the movie shines in kind of a wide shot where, like, a lot of different things are happening in the frame.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of something I said about the much better movie, Power of the Dog, where it's like, this place is a little bit like the ranch and Power of the Dog. There's people kind of moving around. It feels like a real... I mean, there's ways in which it doesn't feel real, but it has a certain sort of... The movie does a good job of having people kind of come in and out and around and creating kind of an environment that you feel like you're watching... You feel at the... When the movie is good, you feel like kind of a fly on the wall to watch this thing play out.
And I think... To that credit, they because she actually undercuts her directing qualities, because had they kept... There's one sequence that could put this all into perspective, where they have a sitting shot and it's Patty Considine in a therapy session with a particular, but there's something happening. It's like the parrot girl is like over here on the right within frame, but not in frame. So instead they cut because he moves over, and within that same context, because I think he's talking to Rufus, I think it's the German Shepherd kid. And then within the same scene, what happens is a anti-animal therapy guy comes in with a horse head and throws a dead dog through the window. Now, again,
those guys run in from another movie, right?
From an entirely different movie.
They escaped the set, and they run in from another movie and do some shit, and then run back to that movie or somewhere else. Yeah, right?
Somewhere else. Never.
But those guys are not from this movie.
No, but again, do the same action, but have the same set frame. Just dolly the camera over, dolly the camera back in movement, and have that same thing happen. That scene is entirely more powerful.
Yes. Although I still think the movie looks good.
Yes,
like
it does have a good look.
I think that the cinematography and the sort of visual design of it are well conceived.
Yeah.
And interesting. And the thing that I was most impressed by, and I think it's sad because these people end up being ill-served, I really bought into the actors and their sort of animalistic portrayals.
This is the important thing.
And in a way that I thought this would be ridiculous. Yeah. Like, I thought this would be hard to watch. But credit to Lily Rose Depp, and I forget the name of the guy.
George McKay, who's the lead in 1917.
Yeah, credit to both of them for... Like I said, I wish they'd been served by a better script, because I bought... Like, they sell this sort of animal like their attempt to act as a human acting like an animal in a way that, like I said, it could have been ridiculous. It could have been cartoonish. It could have been hard to watch. And I didn't, and I was not in an empty theater. Like, I didn't hear people titter. I didn't hear people think, oh, this is stupid or ridiculous. And I didn't think that. I was like, wow, they are like, the combination of the cinematography and the way they act, I was really impressed by it. Like, yes. I thought that this, you could imagine this being just you could imagine this being, if it goes wrong, it's in the MST3K territory.
Yes,
like, you could imagine a movie like this getting into like that kind of territory, and it doesn't.
No,
and
doesn't.
Credit where credit's due, right? Like that I was very impressed by, and and that's why this movie kind of makes me sad in a way, because I feel like it has real potential.
It does.
Like, there's a lot. The only thing it's really lacking is entirely having a story that goes anywhere. And I mean, like, at least for me, the ending felt like they ran out of money. like we're fine, we're up-to-date cinephiles. I'm fine with an open-ended ending, right? That's fine with me. But it should have some sort of there should be some intrigue to it or some
Yeah.
interest to it or some way that this just felt like it ended at like, I don't know, like the beginning of the third act or something.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Like it was a very unsatisfying ending that didn't really, and once again, it never, like you said, it never, there's no twist, there's no reveal, there's no sense of like, oh wow, I get it, or that's interesting, or there was something interesting going on here. And I mean, the villain is just the most cartoonish one-note villain you can imagine.
Truly unfortunate because Paddy Considine's a great
He's
actor.
He does what he can. But like I said, that's the theme. Is like, I think these actors all do good work. Yeah. But like the villain is just so uninteresting, right? Nothing ever happens that's interesting with this character.
Well,
he's just terrible. He's terrible. And his terribleness eventually causes people to make certain decisions.
And his terribleness goes into a cartoonish arena. Again, but you're right, because his terribleness should be counteracted by defense. Because there's a sequence where he brings George McKay's character and he shows him a wolf in a cage. And he's like, this is a pathetic creature. Do you think you're a pathetic creature? And he does it to everybody. Look at how pitiful Squirrel is. Look at how pitiful these things are. How would you really like to be this animal?
See, part of this though is going back to your point about gay conversion therapy. I mean, part of the problem with this movie is that he's got a point, but there's nothing interesting about the way he makes the point.
No, yeah, exactly.
Like there's nothing wrong with being gay. There's no value to gay conversion therapy. Gay conversion therapy is torture and terrible and absolutely gross and disgusting.
Absolutely.
But if a person thinks they're a squirrel, I think you can make a reasonable case for some sort of therapeutic intervention. Not the one in this movie, of course, because he's torturing these people. Yeah. But yeah, if someone thinks they're a squirrel, that is a delusion.
Yeah. Well, and I think
that is an actual form of psychosis.
Well, and this
might choose to intervene in.
This is where the complex, because I think that they would. Treading those kinds of waters for legitimate body dysmorphia therapeutic in intervention, I think is a legitimate mode of response to this particular problem. But because they're doing allegorical, we can't actually interpret that as a literal sort of defense or device. It has to take on a different connotation, and they're unwilling to go into the treacherous waters of what this all implies.
Yeah. Well, so I think our top line takeaway before we explicitly do spoilers, I feel like we're kind of in the same place. Some good elements, ultimately not a good movie. Mm-hmm. A script that just doesn't really work, doesn't go anywhere. A villain that is just kind of ridiculous. And doesn't really have. Yeah,
it doesn't have a philosophy. Doesn't have a point.
It's feel bad. I feel bad because like I said, this is the kind of movie that makes me feel bad because it's like visually, acting wise, there's a lot. Like it could be good, but it's not. It's not because the story's not good. And at the end of the day, if you don't have that, you don't have much.
And it really, and you are correct that it really lets down what I think is an entirely credible performance.
These actors are given a tough task, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is tough, right? Because at first I thought this is going to be silly, like. This is like that idea of doing improv activities about where you're an animal, like taken way too far. Like someone's like, that's a great idea. Let's make a movie about that.
Yeah.
Let's make a whole movie about that acting exercise. Yeah. But the sad thing is, in a way, that's what happens because nothing happens, and the individual things that are excellent are overborne by the fundamental failure of storytelling.
Yeah.
The fundamental failure to have a storytelling.
Yeah.
So now we do spoilers.
Yeah. Well, and so I think getting into the rhythms of this movie, ultimately the tone that's set off is one that is just flatlined, as you said.
Yeah.
And because of that, any notion of drama or revelation or challenge, whether it is a relationship that's brooding, coming to terms with a guy who thinks he's a wolf versus a girl who thinks she's a particular cat. I forget.
Some kind of cat, whatever, kind of cat.
And that
a jungle cat though, not like a house cat.
Yeah,
wild
not
cat.
a house cat.
I think it calls wild cat. Actually,
Yeah,
I think it's a wild cat. Whatever that means.
And
not a house cat.
That dynamic, one again, is introduced yet underserved, and then when they go into this idea of him wanting to change, but then ultimately like his instinct is to protect people. Maybe I don't know what it is. It again,
none of this shit makes the least bit of fucking sense.
No, it doesn't, because they just power through without having a logic to the changes within their characters. And it's really unfortunate because George McKay and his physicality, I mean, talk about just a fully embodied physical
Yeah, I mean, the first
performance.
thing you see is his butt. I love that.
That's true.
We like, and we're going to talk about Benedetta later. This movie is a somewhat horny movie. We'll talk about maybe one of the most horny movies in recent memory in a minute.
Yes,
but this is a somewhat horny movie.
But underserved by that tone. Like
yes. And all you get is kind of a sad hand job that you don't even get to watch. Right? I mean, like
sad, isn't it?
Like, because like they're sexy. Like they're kind of the way they animalistically approach each other in kind of one of the big set piece scenes in the movie. It's like, it's sexy. You're like, why don't you just? I understand that that's like interspecies, so maybe they have trouble to reconcile that with their with their mental commitments. But it seems like they might be able to get past that.
So actually, here's a question, because you brought up the end. Which I think is terrible, because it's not even.
I mean, it just feels like they just ran out. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, we're doing spoilers. Like the end is just. He leaves, she stays. Okay.
So the end.
I mean, that's it. That's the end.
So I think that's a lost opportunity in a large sense, because ultimately he's trying to get out, and she ultimately can't follow through. This shows that ultimately she can't follow through. That whether it is because she's a cat, whether she's domesticated, whatever that is,
she's been brought inside.
He wants to be free. He wants her to come with her, and she ultimately decides not to. It almost doesn't. It makes sense to her cat-like mentality that she wouldn't leave. See, there's no challenge really there. They should both be wolves. But it just
seems like made-up drama, right?
You're right.
Like who? Because at the end of the day, who cares if she stays or goes?
Yeah.
Her desire to stay kind of comes out of nowhere, right?
Yes.
She's like, "Oh, don't leave. Stay here with me. It's going to be okay." Like, but that goes to the deeper problems with the movie, right? Which is that, so. The villain is terrible. He starts terrible. He ends terrible. Everything he does is terrible. He tortures these people from the jump.
Yeah.
Everyone except for, I guess, the wolf has Stockholm Syndrome, apparently. We don't see any reason they should have Stockholm Syndrome, right? Like, he's not even, like, nice to them some of the time. He's just terrible all the time.
Yeah. It should be more manipulative.
Yes, he's just terrible all the time. So the only anchor that the movie gets you for why people put up with this shit is that, like, it's bad to be the animal person, and you don't want to be that. You want to get cured, but a lot of them don't want to get cured. And he's so terrible that, like, you have to escalate along some axis, right? Either he escalates, right? So you could imagine one kind of movie where he escalates because he feels like he's doing the righteous thing, which is kind of what they do, but he doesn't really escalate. And then there's a response, right? Or if you want to make him terrible from the jump, that's fine, but then they need to escalate, right? Like, someone needs to be like, this is fucked up. We're not going to do this.
It needs to be, have you seen Lindsay Anderson's If? With Malcolm McDowell. So it's they treat the students in disciplinary form so atrocious, and it lifts that it ultimately ends up in revolt. And they revolt.
There's no sense of pressure.
Yeah.
Right? Like so if you want to make the villain just terrible from the jump, like I said, that's fine. But then the pressure has to build and build until something happens. I mean, in one of the more harrowing but also kind of hard to believe sequences, he basically has one of his, like, goons try to push the bird woman out a window.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's horrifying. And you cannot tell me. Like, the most resistance you got. I mean, another way you can tell this is a badly written movie is because people utter lines that are just straight from the controlling ideas of the movie.
It's
like,
true.
there's the one actor who thinks she's a panda. And then there's the bad guy. And they both have lines. Like the panda girl is just meant to say the antithesis to what the bad guy says. So they just utter lines that are just pure theme, which is always a sign of bad writing.
It is.
But moreover, like, she doesn't do anything.
No, she disappears.
Does anything.
Yeah.
And like to basically try to defenestrate someone, right? That's a pretty big thing to do, to threaten someone with defenestration. Earlier in the movie, in the most gruesome single shot, we see a thumbnail ripped off from the squirrel guy because he can't climb like a squirrel.
Yeah.
It's like, don't climb like a boy, climb like a squirrel. It's like, it's all so terrible. They all watch it happen and nobody says anything or does anything. There's no sense of a ratcheting up of pressure, of any sort of defiance. At the end of the day, the only act of defiance we ever see is right at the end. He leaves. Right? And they kind of sneak out and they do a few things.
Yeah.
But it's just totally... It's just dishwater dull because, like, nothing is happening. Like, you see him almost throw a girl out the window and no one's like, I want to kill this guy. I want to fight this guy. We should all escape. We should take the place over.
I thought that's what it was going to build to because, and it started getting there when they start, like, they hear him being tortured up in the...
Yes, and that's near the very end of the movie, and they, like, break some shit.
And then he silences them. He becomes animalistic himself and silences them into submission. And I'm just like, I feel like we've lost the narrative
that scene
here.
Should have been in like the first 30 minutes of the movie, where like they try to rebel and he breaks them back down. Right? Like it's so implausible.
Yeah.
Right? That they're all so, like I said, either maybe you make him good at doing Stockholm Syndrome and then it becomes more of a psychological thing, right? You can go in a lot of different directions, but this movie like chooses none of them.
None. Yeah.
It chooses none of them. It just chooses it's just so static.
Yeah.
And like it's like I said, at the end he leaves, she stays, who cares? Like there's nothing interesting. I mean he is I mean, I guess the wolf guy, like you said, well, he's subjected to like actual medieval fucking torture.
Yeah.
Like they go to really very dark places with him.
Well, and that's also an inconsistency.
Like whatever. So they torture him enough and he leaves.
But that's also an inconsistency because it's like everybody else they allow the parrot girl to dress up as a parrot to almost essentially be.
Like, but once again, it's like an interesting idea that kind of doesn't get leveraged, right? Because they suggest like, oh, you get certain privileges to be your animal if you do certain other things that are good. Does that really make sense therapeutically? No, not really.
It doesn't. No.
But also, like, if it's all about carrots and sticks, and it's about like maybe his motivation is just to keep them there, so he acts like he's curing them, but he's really not. That's another dynamic that you could have in the movie. That could be the driving force in the plot, but it's not. There's just like I said, it's like they had the premise. You see this in movies sometimes, right? They had the premise, they thought it was cool, and they never got past the premise. They do nothing interesting with the premise.
Yeah, because
nothing story-wise interesting.
Because even therapeutically, it doesn't make sense why they cage him and treat him like an animal. Because because that essentially is reinforcing the idea that he is the animal that he thinks he is. He just needs to. But also,
he doesn't do anything to even merit that escalation.
He doesn't. No, like he protects one kid, but he doesn't do an ultimate act of violence.
Or even an act of defiance, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh well, we can't have you here.
It's not even
make an example of you.
I mean, in a comparative sense, you could look at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a template for this movie, and that if you followed One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the ratcheting of tension and the build-up, I mean, that would make more sense as a template for this, because then you have the ultimate act of defiance, and then maybe the ultimate. That they put him down. They put him down like an animal, or he escapes, and there's an ambiguity to that. Like, is he a wolf? I mean, I think the logic of the film, they're trying to say it's like a fairy tale, that everybody else is not who they say they are, but he is. That he is actually a wolf.
I mean, it's probably not fair to compare this with like an all-time.
I'm just saying. But
yes, that's the template, right?
Yeah.
Or that's a template, right?
Yeah.
That's the template of you have someone terrible. And there's escalation, right? The people keep on defying, and eventually that escalates.
You're testing the waters. You're trying to push. You're trying to have some semblance of control of yourself or of the people around you and the environment. And they have to respond in kind. And again, Nurse Ratched is one of the most ultimate villains, but I think it's because of the casual nature of introducing punishment, whether it's justified or not.
But I mean, think about that movie and the emotional impact of the end of that movie, which is gutting. Right? It is gutting. It is one of the most impactful. Like, you watch that movie and you need to just sit down for a while.
You do.
And I watched this movie and I walked out of the theater and I was like, I want a sandwich. Right? I mean, that's not, like, it's there's just no impact because
there's not. No.
Because the movie, like I said, is so static that I mean, the villain is too terrible to be believed. Their responses are, you don't feel anything about them. They don't really defy. Like I said, his only real act of defiance is to leave. Yeah, he defends someone, right? But it's very. I mean, like I said, there's just all kinds of things you could do, right? Is it a Stockholm syndrome thing?
Well, it's an interesting.
Is it a torture thing? Like,
again,
are they defiant? It's just, I mean,
it has a lot of ideas there. Like, it's interesting because the defense of the young kid is an interesting notion in the film because it's like this older guy. He's clearly not acting like his animal in pushing this kid around. He's mocking
He's a real
him.
boy now.
He's a real boy.
He's a real boy, a real piece of shit.
Well, and so again, the movie doesn't take that anywhere or have real criticism because that's an interesting thought, isn't it? If he were his animal, maybe he wouldn't be actually being a bully. Wouldn't he actually be a terrible person? But they're saying being a human is superior. He has
what is it Freud said? So I made her boring, right? I made her boring. Like are we making people boring or base? Like me. Like, once again, the movie sort of hints at the idea that, like, there's something noble about being a wolf, but it doesn't do anything with that either.
It doesn't do that,
and
no.
It's just not, it's absolutely the kind of movie, like, we talk about these sort of big-budget, bloated blockbusters where the problem is they have all these ideas and they just do them all. Here they have, like, one idea, it's pretty good as an idea, like, it has promise, but it just never goes anywhere.
None.
They just have nothing to say about it. And I think that's really all I have to say.
I think that's very fair. I think that's very fair because it's so thin. You're right. It's one idea that's done thinly, and therefore all of the narrative deviations, the character deviations, the thought-provoking elements that could have been there don't exist. So we can't necessarily talk about those as the film presents them because they're not presented very well. So you're right. There's not much more to say about it. I think it's not necessarily, in a review sense, it's not necessarily worth your money. I think it's a rental or it's a Netflix wait.
I just wished like I said, I think I definitely got more out of this experience. I mean, there's a lot of there's something here, which is more than I can say for some of the shit we watched.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's deeply
frustrating. It's a frustrating movie because you want it to be, you see the potential and you want it to be.
And they're not doing. And when they're not doing, you almost want to shake them.
Yeah, you're
like why? Why would you waste this?
Make this because if the story were just even like medium level interesting in terms of its construction, this would be a good movie.
Yeah.
Like, this would be a definite big thumbs up for me. If the story were just fine.
Yeah.
Right. If they if they just ripped off Cuckoo's Nest. Right, if they just ripped
with animal dysmorphia,
if they just ripped off the central structure of that, and had kind of that, had that array of characters, right?
Yeah.
Steal from the best, and then you've got a movie that's derivative, but it still creates like a workable template to do the things that are unique about this movie, right? Which are the sort of positive things we highlighted. Yeah. But let's talk about the horny lesbian nuns. I can't wait. I can't wait. I would say we haven't talked about this movie at all.
No, we have not.
We generally don't talk about these things before we start.
But I
said, it's like the first life. It's never. Once you've seen a thing once, like that first time you see Romeo and Juliet, you'll never be able to have that experience again. No matter how many times you watch it, no matter how much you analyze it, the magic of that first time, you can never recapture it. You just can't. And so too it is with Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta, the lesbian nun movie. Which is what it should be called.
It just should be called lesbian nun movie.
Lesbian nun movie.
Benedetta.
Right. I love movies that end with movie. Right. One thing you can tell you is if the movie has the word movie in the title, sign me up. Sign me up.
Well, let's talk about Benedetta.
Let's talk about Benedetta. I mean, what is there? You know, I mean, we should. I don't know if the whole review should be spoiler free because I don't think it's particular. Like the plot, like who really cares?
I can root people in what it's based on. Like, you know, it is based off.
It's based on lesbian nuns.
It's a true story.
Well, I mean,
it's a true story.
There is. I think to call it a true story, what would we say? There is some sort of historical antecedent which this movie is
based
allegedly
on,
or ostensibly based.
Well, it's loosely based. I mean that's where that we should use that word liberally, is loosely based on the scholarly work Immodest Acts, The Life of a Lesbian Nun in Renaissance Italy by Judith C. Brown. And the case of Benedetta is a real sort of acknowledged case that it did happen. She was an abbess of a convent in Pescia, Italy in the early 1600s. And who claimed to have a miraculous visions, but it was also in a playful sexual relationship with another nun. And so it's such a fascinating story. And actually, watching it is, as you said, is an experience because, and it's what I'm trying to like wrestle with. Whether I'm either desensitized to this kind of material because I've seen nunsploitation movies before. I've seen Alucard out of Mexico. I've seen Ken Russell's The Devils.
And I mean, I don't want to say, I'm not going to speak for you, but the other thing I've seen is pornography. I've seen pornography.
Well, no, but putting this, I get the intent.
But nevertheless, you will not see anything more pornographic at an AMC movie theater.
That's very true.
Than this.
That's very true.
So
I mean,
that may be I see. I like horny movies. I like sex in my movies.
This is Blue is the Warmest Color meets Black Narcissist. Like this is that's what this is.
I mean, and so you won't see it. To see this to see a movie, it used to be you had to go to an adult movie theater to see material like this projected on the screen.
Yeah.
And so for that alone, you know, you weigh that in your ticket buying purchase decision.
And so this is the thing. So Paul, when we talked about House of Gucci, and we talked about the level of camp that is required, the tone of camp and exaggeration that's required to make that story sort of really hit the ground running and be believable in its heightened sensibilities. That's what Verhoeven is, a satirist, and has been so ever since he came over to America to do RoboCop. Like he didn't understand,
which I love.
Yeah,
I just want to say that
RoboCop.
I've got a complex array of feelings about this movie, and I'm still not sure what I think about it.
Yeah.
But maybe that's why we talk about it, because we get a better sense. But yes, RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers.
Basic Instinct. Like, I mean, the guy has a satirical mind. And it's funny because when he came over from doing, like, Turkish Delight and doing some European fare, before he did RoboCop, because it was his first American movie, he turned it down. He threw the script in the trash, said it was garbage. And then his wife read it and said, "You're not getting the joke." And luckily for us, he has since gotten the joke.
Oh, like, he's making the joke.
He's making the joke.
I mean,
now.
It is funny, right? How this sort of dyspeptic immigrant is sometimes. I always think of this about Billy Wilder, right?
Yeah.
To me, there is no greater filmmaker student of America than Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
It was an immigrant, right? I mean, there's something about coming from another place and coming to this country where you can see things
in all of its clarity.
But I mean, Benedetta is not a movie about America in any sense.
No.
I'm not so much of an American chauvinist that I would say that. But I would argue his best work is done as very incisive satire of
America,
this country,
of this
country.
Right? And I like that in his now later years.
But yes, talk about jumping from Ridley Scott to Paul Verhoeven. I mean, they're both old.
But Verhoeven has a, this is a guy who, when shooting Starship Troopers, the famous, naked shower sequence. Some of the American actors were like, we don't want to do that. And he's like, what's the problem with being naked? Because this is a very Dutch, European man. And he and the cinematographer...
Did he get naked?
Yes, he did.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that story.
He and the cinematographer, it was a closed set. It was just him and the cinematographer and the cast, and they were all... Cinematographer and Verhoeven were naked in the scene. Because he's like, there's no problem. We'll do it. Because I think it was... I forget. It wasn't. It was one of the actresses. She was like, "Well, why don't you get naked?" He's like, "Okay." And he and the cinematographer stripped down. They were like,
"You don't have to ask me twice.
You don't have to ask me twice.
Don't threaten me with a good time."
So he obviously has a keen interest in being incisive, whether it is on this take. I mean, if you listen to the I Know Movies and You Don't podcast about Starship Troopers, we dissect that it's not a fascist society. He thinks it's a fascist society. It's not actually, from the book or interpretive sense, a fascist society. But what he is trying to elucidate in his vision and in his imagery, he has something to say. He wants to say something. But I
think that's actually what's great about Starship Troopers is that I think it's more right about America than maybe he knows.
Yes, yeah.
Because we don't live in America's not a fascist society,
no.
Right? It never has been, and it wasn't even under Trump, whatever people tell you. But it is a society that flirts with some of the aesthetics of fascism. I
agree, yes.
Right?
Yes, yeah.
Which in a way is more about what America is than an actual fascist society. I heard, it's funny, I was listening to, let's bring in our friend Zizek, who is one of the great lovers of movies. I was listening to Zizek the other day talk about Trump, and I think one thing he said about that was very interesting, I think is very true of America, is like, these people don't want actual fascism because they don't want actual power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They want to sort of let the kind of whatever really has power in America, which is really money and big business, kind of keep rolling, doing its thing in its sort of vaguely neoliberal configuration, while kind of embracing some of the like aesthetic trappings of fascism, right?
Yes,
and nationalism,
yes.
Right? And that to me is another like very weirdly. I mean, I know we're getting off track. This has nothing to do with Benedetta.
I was trying to build up to Benedetta.
No, but I love to talk about Starship Troopers and Verhoeven and all.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, I guess I've tipped my hand that I think that this is not as good as that, because I think that's his best stuff.
Yeah.
But how good it is, I guess, we have to get to.
Well, it's interesting. After Starship Troopers, there's a lull in his career. He does like Black Book, and he does some other movies, but none of them are very interesting. But it was in 2016 he does Elle, which I don't know if you've seen.
I've not seen Elle.
I do recommend it.
I know people love it. I should see it.
It is fantastic because it has some very salacious and challenging outlooks about the aspect of rape in society, but that aspect about attraction and people. And it's a fascinating study, and it's challenging, and it really pushes you to some discomforting levels. And Benedetta, while not as discomforting, which I think, although I think for some people it would be, I think the exact people it's trying to push and challenge and poke and prod are the people with highly religious, overly religious sensibilities.
But can I jump in right there? Because I think that this is one high level. There's a couple different high level discussions, sort of abstract discussions you can have about this movie. So here was my thought. I was thinking about. I was so engaged with thinking about this coming over. I got off at the wrong exit. I got off one exit too early. So I was talking to myself, imagining myself talking to you. So clearly, I'm very engaged with this question. So what do you need for a movie to be an effective or not any piece of art, but we'll talk about movie. What does it need to have to be an effective provocation? These have two things need to be true. One is that the content has to be offensive to some people.
Yes.
No question here, right? But the second thing it has to have is people need to care about it.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you something. That is a Venn diagram with no overlap in our society.
That's interesting.
Because our society is so bifurcated now. Now contrast that with the movie that kind of gave rise to the power of the Catholic League. Are you familiar with Bill Donahue and the Catholic League?
A little bit. Just a little bit.
So they're the ones who protest all these movies, and they made their bones on The Last Temptation of Christ.
This is a very similar film.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, similar in one sense, right?
In one sense, yeah.
The difference, though, is that there was an overlap there because that was a different culture where these kinds of things, you're talking about Martin Scorsese making a big movie in the 80s when people could still get upset about shit like this, and where someone like Bill Donahue the Catholic League guy could get on cable news and network news and run his thing about how Catholics are the most oppressed people in the world because the evil satanic people in Hollywood will let them do this anti-Catholic thing.
It's funny because my dad does talk about this. My dad's very Catholic, and he was approached during the time about banning the book The Last Temptation of Christ and protesting the movie. And my dad comes from a film background. He's very Catholic and very religious, very, very involved in the church, but he also found that to be silly.
It is silly, right?
Yeah.
But it's a silliness that, I mean, that culture war over Last Temptation was huge mainstream fodder. I mean, people reference it to this day.
Yeah.
Like, my dad would talk about it, who is a lapsed Catholic and not in the film industry, because it was that level of a cultural conflict, and it made this guy famous. Now I looked, and of course they cut and pasted, the Catholic League cut and pasted the same press release. Like I said, I mean, he really does say things like Catholics are the most hated people in the world and shit like this, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the difference is nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Not anymore.
I was
Certainly
telling
not,
some people about some people who are not up-to-date cinephiles and who live out in middle America, right? And I was on a Zoom with them, and I said, oh yeah, I just saw the lesbian nun movie, and they didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, it's not even on the radar.
They didn't even know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't think they would have heard about it if it weren't for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people don't care. There's no overlap. Like that's why, that's why people who are much younger than us don't know who Bill Donahue is. Even though at one point him and the Catholic League, like, they loomed large. They were significant.
This is an interesting thing that you've brought up, because I've been wrestling with the idea of why I am not as engaged, because I love The Last Temptation of Christ. I think it is a great movie. I think people who were against it and protesting it misunderstand that book, misunderstand what the movie is about.
I mean, what is the evil of that story is that it humanizes Christ just a little.
Which in theology is true. He's
fully human, fully divine.
Fully human, fully divine. And I like that the book, I think the book is an exceptional piece of contemplation. I think the movie is one of Scorsese's finest works. It's I would put it in my top 5 of his works because of how challenging and authentic he treats that question. I think as a theological exercise, it's magnificent.
Well, and Scorsese is a Catholic. I mean, he cares about this shit.
And I think Schrader did the script, and who comes from a Calvinist background, somebody who's wrestling with a lot.
Our great Catholic and great Protestant filmmakers. Yes. And I mean this movie. But like I said, the contrast is stark. Not only because, query. I'm not even sure what Verhoeven is trying to say in this movie, nor am I certain that he's trying to say anything at all.
Well, when we get into spoiler, I do think I understand what he's trying to say.
But one thing that I kept thinking in this movie, and I will give, once we get into spoilers, my top 3 provocations from this movie.
There's a couple good ones.
And I'll just say that, who is being provoked, right? Who is this for?
Yeah.
Right? That's one thing I found myself asking, is like, who is this for? Because one thing, one thing that Donahue says in press release is, terrible anti-Catholic movie that received a standing ovation at Cannes. I don't know if it received a standing ovation. I'm sure it did. I don't know why you'd lie about that, but I don't even care because, I do think it's a little. I mean, whatever the point is, I agree. I guess people should be lesbians if they want to. The Catholic Church, for much of its history, has been a terrible organization. There's really no interesting debate to be had about that.
Yeah, and they show it in all of its filthy politics.
But what makes the Catholic Church terrible today has really very little to do with what made it terrible then. It's such a like what was then like a world bestriding colossus is now kind of a sclerotic institution that used the last of its real juice to protect child molesters, right? Yeah. That's what's terrible about the Catholic Church now, right? Which is different than then.
Very, very troubling.
But there is a certain sense of, when I see this, I feel like there's a kind of old person, like an old liberal self-congratulation for how enlightened we are that we can watch this thing. And honestly, who gives a fuck? I don't, this idea that we're sitting here on the coast, sneering down at people who would be offended by this. I just find that a little distasteful.
There is this is
we're
the thing.
so enlightened we can watch lesbian nuns. I'm like, shit. People, there's a million people watching lesbian nuns on Pornhub right now. Like, who gives a fuck? Yeah. I just find that, like, and I'm not saying I hate this movie, but there is an element of that kind of looking down on people that I find offensive.
It's interesting
because I just think it's bullshit. Like, if you were born to be like an old traditional Catholic lady, you'd be offended too. Like, you're like the fact that we're born in a different circumstance where we can luxuriate in our ability to watch this movie and not like cross ourselves and walk out the door. That's just a contingent accident of our lives. That has nothing to do with us being particularly enlightened.
No. So this is exactly the point where I've been wrestling when somebody brought it up and they were like, I really liked it. And I was like, I might have liked it when I was in college. And not even now college. I mean, then college.
It's like that line from... There's a line about like fucking a nun or getting a head from a nun, and I think Black Skinhead or something. Yeah. And there's a great Lou Reed review. One of the last things he wrote in where he said, that might have been funny if I was 12. Mm-hmm. In an otherwise favorable review of the album, he said like, who's that for? Like who like jokes about like eating out a nun or whatever. Like that's not. Yeah. I mean, it's not. And this is, we're talking about Lou Reed. This is a very transgressive person. This is a person who was at the height of all kinds of cultural transgression. And he looks at this, like, transgression and says, that's fucking stupid. Yeah. Like, who's that for? That's not funny. That's not interesting. Yeah. And, like, this idea that you'd watch and think, oh, I'm so enlightened. I mean, Jesus Christ. That's a funny use of that particular... Yeah, forgive me, Jesus.
There's an interesting comparison, because I know you didn't see it, and we talked about Last Duel on House of Gucci. But there's the worst sequence in Last Duel has this modernist looking back sensibility where they're like, look at how stupid everybody was back then. And it's during the trial, they're basically like, did you enjoy sex with your husband because you can only get pregnant if you orgasm? That was the mentality back then. And how the scene is treated is in high camp form. It's probably more camp than anything in House of Gucci. Is how absurd and ridiculous and stupid everybody was back then. But then again, like, you have to look at that time period and go, well, yeah, they didn't have access to information. They were filled with all of these biases and prejudices.
Yeah, they also didn't know how to do an X-ray. Like, what the fuck?
They didn't know any of this. And so for Benedetta, the entire tone of the movie is that scene. And I'm like, oh, you all think that you're congratulating yourself on how enlightened and progressive and how further we've progressed during this time, which is filled to the brim with sexism and this religiosity and disgusting politics of the church. And you're like, yeah, this time was terrible. This time was unenlightened. But it doesn't mean that you portray it in such an authenticity and have a commentary. You're right. At the end of the day, who's it for? For you to applaud yourself, or to actually challenge and provoke and incite conversation with somebody? But you're right. Who is it for? Because nobody who would be offended by this knows of its existence.
You know what Paul Verhoeven is in this movie? He's a shit poster.
That's true.
That's all this movie is just a big shit post. Yeah. Right, and there are things about it that are very good. He's a good shit poster.
He is a good shit poster.
But this is a shit post. Like, he's not in like the things he was. I mean, this is the great irony of his oeuvre, right? Is that the things that he was making movies about in the 80s kind of went away for a while, but have become more relevant again, right?
And that's why they sustain.
Take RoboCop, right? Yeah. So in the 80s, there was this idea that cities were shitholes and that they were going to become war zones. And then the Cold War ended, and there was this 90s boom, and there was this urban reinvigoration, right? Giuliani came in and cleaned up New York, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then so then our major cities went from being these edgy, frightening places to being essentially playgrounds for the wealthy, and a bunch of people who had left, the children of people who'd left for the suburbs and white flight came back. But now we see it coming back around, right? My old home city, Chicago, people talk about it now like it's a fucking war zone. Like, if you walk down the street, you're going to get shot. That's not really true, except in very specific parts of the city that, people, that are riven by the drug trade and poverty. But whatever, the narrative of the city as this site of tremendous disease and fear and danger, that's coming back.
It is. Yeah, the conversation
like
has
I said,
definitely
Starship
come back.
Troopers, this idea of creeping aesthetic fascism, right? Total Recall, this idea of what's real, what's not real, how we're monitored, how we're surveilled, how we're marketed to in these very hyper individualized ways, right? Those movies are a lot more relevant than talking about how, like, wow, Catholics hundreds of years ago, they had some real backwards views.
Yeah. I mean, you almost get a more incisive and interesting commentary from History of the World Part 1, like in the Spanish Inquisition, sense.
Yeah, or if you want to watch a movie about what's fucked up at the Catholic Church now, you watch Spotlight, right?
Spotlight, Spotlight is incredibly prescient and about what is going on today, and that was a huge deal. And what's
the stage play that was made in the movie with, I think,
Doubt,
yeah,
Doubt's incredible.
Same thing. Those
not the movie. The play is wonderful. The movie's fine.
But I mean, what I'm saying
Great
is
actors,
those
though.
are stories that resonate with what the Catholic Church is today.
Yeah,
right. Which is like this. Like I said, it's kind of a sclerotic institution. But part of the reason that Last Temptation was what it was in this movie is what it is that, like, there is a tipping point of irrelevance somewhere in there, right? Like the sort of broad cultural relevance of the Catholic Church in the West was on fumes in the 80s, but it was still there. Whereas now, as a cultural institution, I mean, the Catholic Church itself has given up on the West. Its cultural focus is all in
South America,
in the global South,
Africa,
right?
Yeah,
where they feel like their more conservative views can still get some traction.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at Western Europe, I mean, almost everyone in continental Western Europe is like nominally Catholic, right? Yeah. But nobody cares. Like there's no sense that, oh my God, like I can't have premarital sex because what will the church think, right? I mean, even people who go to church, which is a decreasing number, don't feel that way.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, I mean, there it's funny. Catholicism has taken sort of a similar role to like a lot of what we see with like secular Judaism in the United States.
Yeah, this is true.
People maintain certain traditions to maintain a link with their family and a link with the past, and because tradition,
cultural community,
tradition and ritual is binding and important, but they don't actually believe, right? They don't, I mean, the sites of like fervent faith in America are all charismatic, Protestant Christians, right?
Yeah,
that's where the fervor is here.
Yeah.
Like I mean, that's why you're gonna get like 7 people out protesting the premiere of this movie because nobody cares.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I feel like offense is in the hands of the culture, as you're kind of leading to, and so the culture has, you even have like in the, I think of how casual the insults towards Western faith and Western institutions are. In a casual sense, you can even go to like Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's the episode where he's peeing and like a drip of urine hits the picture of the Mother Mary, and they think it's like a miracle that she's crying. Mm-hmm. Like, that's more interesting of a provocation than this movie is, really, because this one's so exaggerated and so over the top that you're like, really, who is this for?
Yeah. Who is provoked?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not me.
Yeah. Who is provoked?
In fact,
show me the person who's.
In fact, I was kind of bored by it because I'm like, oh, come on, like I am not a 17-year-old who would find this, titillating. I'm mildly titillating, as a grown man, but it's because
I mean, there's some real, prurient content, right? Which I mean,
there's hallucinations that which I think are the best part, but I laugh in like kind of like it's kind of silly. But is it really insulting?
Let's do spoilers.
Let's go spoilers. Let's go spoilers.
Okay. Top 3 provocations from this movie.
I mean,
I'm going to surprise you. No, I'm going to surprise. Okay. Or do you want to do a contemporaneous? We're going to have some of the same ones, but my number 1 is probably going to surprise you.
Okay.
So, number 3, Jesus has no penis.
Yes.
Number 3
on the cross. Which by the way is how he's depicted. I think mostly in.
Yeah, you don't need one.
You don't need one. No. I think when you go to big churches, and they have the crucifix. This idea that he wouldn't have one. I mean, I think the statues are literally made that way.
He's not here for that kind of good time.
No.
He's not on earth for that kind of good time.
I found that humorous. Absolutely.
Jesus has no penis.
As somebody who has gone to church and seen Jesus on the cross in these institutions, I found that funny.
Yes, I mean, he definitely does nail in some of those visions the really insane aesthetic of Catholicism, right? Which
was born out of this time,
but
I
which
think
is
is
also
very
a
important.
camp aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I've been to some Catholic churches in Europe that are like, whoa,
yeah, they are intense.
That's a real diorama there of horror.
Yeah, absolutely.
God bless. Number 2, the obvious one, Mother Mary's a dildo. That's going to be a lot of people's number
it's funny.
one.
It's funny. I actually don't find that very provocative.
I didn't find any of these things provocative, but I think that I'm ranking them as in terms of their attempt at shock value or weirdness.
It's funny because I'm
just ranking them purely on my own pleasure from them, or how amusing I thought they were.
And maybe it's because I'm genre savvy. Maybe I've seen a lot of these nunsploitation movies. Maybe I'm desensitized, or I'm just a horrific human being who thinks of things in wild ways.
I don't think you're horrific, Kyle.
But as soon as the little girl had the wood Mary that she was praying to, I was like, well, that's going to be used as a dildo.
Oh wow! So you were more prescient than I was.
I was like, nope, that's going into somebody.
Okay.
Later on.
So, but here's my number one, and I'll explain why. My number one favorite provocation from this movie is where the papal nuncio's mistress just squirts breast milk at Charlotte Rampling.
I rolled my eyes at that one.
And what I love about it is because it is in just a brief moment, just the perfect encapsulation, because it's just so gratuitous. It really has no reason.
No reason.
The other 2 I mentioned are important to the movie. Like, whatever you think about them, they're important. I mean, the dildo, the Mother Mary dildo is the sort of essential element of the case against her, right? A case against Benedetta. But the milk squirt is just so hilarious and so over the top and so just out of nowhere. Doesn't need to happen, doesn't need to be there, serves no purpose.
Does not, no.
I mean, we already know that he's made, the papal nuncio has made this woman pregnant.
Yeah.
So just to have her just gratuitously just shoot a little stream of breast milk, which maybe that really was breast milk. I don't know. I don't know how you. I mean, we'd have to talk to some makeup person to figure out how you would do that.
On command, on cue.
So I don't know, but I just remember watching the being like, what? It was like a real I love this moment because it's so ridiculous.
It is because of its unnecessary nature. It has a striking element of that level of absurdity that you can just laugh at it. Like, it is meant to be just a joke. It's just so weird.
It's like, who does that?
Nobody. Nobody does it. Maybe they did it back then. Maybe they were very open. Yeah, maybe.
I just thought it was just so. Because the other ones, like I said,
So you didn't like Jesus coming in and slaughtering people with
I love that
sword?
Too. That just didn't make the top 3. That's honorable mention there.
I found the movie leaves it sort of behind by the time she becomes kind of a prophet, or God's or Jesus speaks through her. As soon as the movie takes on that sort of air, it leaves behind these very personal, very intimate hallucinations that apparently this person in history had. It's been documented. And what I find interesting about those is that they inform me about her psychological journey rather than when the film turns. It takes the turn. It is sort of a question to the audience whether she is actually having stigmata, whether this is real or not, and playing around with that. I like it when the movie submits to that. This is all real, and it's all in her mind, and
but it does the thing in reverse. This is what I don't understand. Like, the first part of the movie is based on the premise that she's doing it.
She's a prophet, and that she's connected with God.
And then you try to problematize it in the second half. That doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, she stops having the vision. She does the shit to herself at various points. Like, it's just...
It's interesting because, like, the turn is that when she's resisting desire, when she's resisting sex, when there's a fear, when there's a discomfort, when it's all that, she has visions, she has connections, she has these, and then once she submits to sexuality, she loses it. Is the movie trying to say that the divine happens when you do not submit to desire?
I don't think that... I don't know what this movie's trying to say, and I don't think...
I think I do know what it's trying to say.
But anyways, like, there's this weird... Yes, it's like two movies where they made two different decisions, right?
And because there's messiness there.
Yeah, it's like... Messy. So the first one is... The first part of the movie is done from her POV, and it takes as for a... I mean, it's not just her visions. Like, she actually, like, has... Like, when the statue falls on her as a kid...
Yeah. They almost have to describe it as miraculous. Yeah,
so she actually does, like, a miracle, right? I mean, so, okay, you take that position, that's fine. But then at the end, it's like... in the second half of the movie, it shifts to, like... The POV is other people, like, wondering if she's for real. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like two different movies.
It is.
With two different central conceits.
It is.
Right? Which is very weird.
Yeah.
Right? It drives the movie to other weird places. And that's why I like, for all its ridiculousness, like, the first part of the movie I enjoyed. I thought it was very effective and fun to watch. And, like, God knows, usually I say, like, Jesus Christ and God knows. I don't. Maybe I'm just influenced by the content of this movie. Like, this movie is different, and, like, I'm fully respect the hunger for something different.
Me too.
Right? Like, you want to see something different. Well, this is different, right? You're not gonna mistake this for any other shit you can see in movies right now. So I get it, and that's why I was, when I combed the reaction after I sort of let my own opinion settle a bit, I was surprised at how well reviewed this movie's been, because I thought it might get panned, like but I think 20 years ago maybe it would have gotten panned. I think I think Verhoeven has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of a kind of critical reappraisal.
Yeah, I think so.
And, like, I wouldn't pan this movie, and I mean, if you want to see it, you should see it, because it is experience. Like,
it is an experience, yeah.
And I get the desire for experiences like this, but, like, once we strip it from that, it's just like there's just the second part of the movie just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't hold weight because so ultimately I think the whole point of the movie, and I think Verhoeven kind of makes it very explicit, is at the end of the movie it is shown that the Black Plague is ravaging Europe at this point.
Yes, that's a big background fact in this movie, is plague and fear of the plague.
And in Pescia, it is true the Black Plague did not enter, and it did not enter during the time that Benedetta was abscess or just in the convent. Abbess.
Abscess is another.
Abscess.
That's a Black Plague.
Maybe that was a Freudian slip. I don't know.
That's a Black Plague slip too.
Abbess of the convent. Excuse me. Of that, she lived to be 70. She lived and
that's the funny part. She can't even get martyred.
No, she can't.
Like, at the end, it's like she wants to get martyred, basically, but she can't even pull that off.
This is the interesting thing. Verhoeven is saying, what I think he's saying is that I think he thinks all miracles and all justifications and all these hallucinations, even though he even has said he has a fascination with the divine, he has a fascination with these things. I don't think he believes in it. But he has a curiosity, which I think makes him a good satirist, because he's, especially in the first, I think the first half of this movie is very good because he takes a literal interpretation of belief, hallucination, and a sincerity with that.
Yeah, let's play it straight in a way.
Play it straight
to see what it would actually entail.
Would entail, what it means. And so the second half loses its way because, and it comes ultimately to what his point is that the Catholic Church is very selective about what they deem as martyrdom or saintlyhood or all these things. Here is a woman in documented history who had stigmata, whether it was self-induced or not, the movie has a question, but declared herself as a protector of this place, declared that if they followed her edict or advice, that the Black Plague would not come, and it didn't. you could almost describe that, especially with how ravaging the Black Plague was, as a miracle. And so the movie, I think, is presenting, in fact, that Verhoeven says, if you accept these other instances of miracle, these other instances of saintlyhood, you have to accept Benedetta as well. But the only reason they don't is because of a open and practicing lesbian sexuality that was not welcome at its time. I think the movie is trying to say that ultimately at the end, that ultimately this concept of selection of what is deemed miraculous or evidence of belief is all bullshit, and that that's where the real provocation would come in, is if you showed Catholics this, if you actively went and showed Catholics this.
If you Clockwork Orange some old lady to watch this movie, it's gonna fuck her up.
That would be real. But
if you, like I said, what is that? Yes, of course. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying that many people wouldn't find this offensive. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they will not be offended because they will never know it exists.
Yes.
And there will be no attempt to inflict it upon them, right?
And so the audience for this movie is essentially people who want to feel good about their enlightened selves. And so again, that's
want to see some. I mean, like the movie is, like I said, it's so horny.
It really is.
It's so violent. It's just so much, and like it could work, but the problem is, right? I don't know exactly what happened, but I can imagine. Like they got to the middle of the movie, they didn't know what to do with it, so they just went to the obvious choice, which is just a sort of to do the "is she or isn't she" bit, right? Which is like, of course you can do that, but it was more interesting when you just assumed she was, yeah. But I guess they didn't know where to go, right? So they didn't. And like, there's other parts of the second half that just don't work for me. Like, why the fuck does the papal nuncio go there in the first place? You'd think he would have the good sense to stay away. Yeah. Right? Like, it's never... Like, the ultimate villain is this papal nuncio who shows up and starts torturing people.
But then you don't have the good jokes. Like, when the guy's like, please give me my last rites because he's dying of the Black Plague. And he goes, go to your local priest. He goes, I am the local priest. Yeah.
No, I mean, there's shit that's funny. I mean, there's a lot of good lines and a lot of funny moments, right? Yeah. But, like, for a movie that starts off so weird, the last part feels a little pro forma, like, and kind of boring. Yeah. Like, the movie has a more interesting wind up than it does a sort of delivery. Because at the end of the day, it's just okay. Yeah, he shows up. There's whatever they do this.
It is interesting that the titillation, the desire, the build up is better than the climax, because it's in both sense, in the religious sense and the ecstasy of religious effect or the ecstasy of sexual effect, that the build up in this movie, again, that first like 45 to an hour ish, is the better part of the movie. And then once they give in to the excess of sexuality, the excess of its violence, the excess of its over the top depiction of church politics and corruption, I found it to just enter a congratulatory sense. Yeah. And it became boring after that.
Yeah, and also there's a certain flatness to all her antagonists, right? They're all sort of cynical in roughly the same way. And the only one who gets to do anything interesting is the one who gets to redeem themselves, which is the former deposed abbess, played wonderfully well by Charlotte
Rampling. Exceptional in this movie.
So she gets to do something interesting where she kind of comes around in her own way.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe it,
but she also has the biggest actual reason to be angry at Benedetta, right? Yeah. So but like everyone else and her up until the end, it's just sort of like a kind of a very amorphous kind of cynicism about like, oh, well, we all know what we're really doing here, right? Yeah. Like, wink, wink. Yeah. And it's not very... I mean, it would be more interesting if there were sort of different views in play. But there really aren't, right? No. There's just... The beginning of the movie is, yeah, she's really a saint. Let's pretend she is and see where that takes us. And then the end is like, oh, well, we don't actually believe in any of this shit for real. Yeah. And we got to take her out. But it's not even clear why they have to take her out. Yeah. Like, at least the abbess, the Charlotte Rampling character, she has like a personal reason. So that's compelling.
Yeah.
But all the other people around her, like, there's some people are kind of trying to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah,
and other
politically,
people who are trying to
financially,
squash it.
Yeah.
But, like, it's not anything... Like I said, like, the papal nuncio just like, okay, well, we got to have someone escalate the thing. And he shows up and is a shithead, and we hate him.
It enters into the weird torture like that. That you're like, oh, this is a lot.
There's this whole torture interlude, which was extremely gratuitous and whatever.
And I'm sure it happened.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that shit all happened.
Yeah.
But like what I'm saying is, there's this moment. So eventually, the people riot and they kill the nuncio, and if the movie is better executed, the moment where someone comes and just stabs the shit out of him should feel really cathartic. And it just doesn't.
It doesn't, no.
It just feels like, okay, this guy was a shitbird and he's dead now.
Yeah.
But they don't... I don't know. It just... It felt to me, like I said, that it didn't have... Or they couldn't think of a way to sort of pay off the first part of the movie, so they just did something like... that. I mean, it works in the sense that it's plausible enough. It doesn't feel weird, but it's just very paint by numbers.
It is.
Yeah, he shows up, he tries to kill her, they kill him.
Well, and then
she's
ultimately,
their hero, blah, blah, blah.
it's interesting because then for the audience, it's for which again,
It's us. It's up-to-date cinephiles.
It is for cinephiles. It's for enlightened moviegoers who want to go venture out some European camp and cinema. Verhoeven brings with him a credible name, and I think he handles the material quite well with his tongue-in-cheek satirical tone, but it is with the material. The material is wanting because
you have to have something interesting to satirize, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying. Like the fears, the tendencies, the shitty aspects of what he's depicting in something like RoboCop are very real and very much. I mean, we live in a world where increasingly people unironically want a fucking RoboCop around, right? Whereas, like, I would say that even the most devout Catholics, if you were to give them sodium pentothal, would not want to return to this world. Like,
no.
They wouldn't look at their world and say, oh yeah, that was better.
No.
They might think that being gay is terrible and that this is all very weird and you shouldn't have if you have your Mother Mary statue, you shouldn't make it into a dildo. Yeah, but they'll take the trade-off of a world where that can happen to not go back to this one.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
Very few people... You'd have to meet a true psycho who says like, "Oh yeah, I'd go back."
Yeah, this is a miserable environment.
I mean, those people want to go back to the 50s, but not like the 1650s, right?
Not
right.
The 1650s.
I mean, so it's not what you're satirizing is not like you're not playing with live ammunition, right?
Yeah.
Even on the terms, and I guess this is maybe where I'm even more frustrated. It's not even live ammunition on the terms of the people you'd want to offend, because yes, they would be offended, but they're not. But they're really going to be offended because they just think you're being sort of extremely distasteful and gauche.
And not necessarily challenging.
Yeah, not because they think, oh yeah, that was a better world. Let's go back there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's go back to plague-ridden Europe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so I think ultimately I just don't know, again, what the point of this whole experience is, particularly for me. I watch it and I'm like, yeah, it's a little exaggerated form. I chuckled at some of its extremities, not even the sexual ones. I found the depictions of Jesus and like the wanting to be Jesus's wife.
Sexy Jesus.
He's
hot.
Yeah.
He's a hot Jesus.
Yeah.
He's out there. He's stabbing people. He's fucking people.
He's saving her. Like he wants to be her husband. And again,
he may or may not want to have sex with her on the cross.
Yeah. I had a course on medieval sexuality for women, and for Catholic from Catholic theology class. It was very interesting because
I mean there had to be more than a few lesbian nuns in there.
Oh yeah,
there, right?
absolutely,
This
absolutely.
Not,
and then
they weren't the only ones.
The stuff they didn't get into, like the re-virginizing oneself, like after they've been de-virginized, and like the process that they do that, the self-flagellation, which they do in this movie, but more as punishment, but not as therapeutic. You have the one nun who is like doing something to her breasts, like, you know, skinning off. Like,
Yeah,
stuff.
that was
It's a lot, you know. But again, these things did happen.
That was a tough one.
That was visually
moment.
a tough sequence to view, and I feel like the era is filled with more complexity than this movie is willing to acknowledge or get into, because they're mocking it. And you know, that's easy. I think that's so easy to mock these people, to mock this time period of history, to mock their views on sexuality.
But it's like watching 2001 and thinking that the apes are dumb, right? I mean, like why are you just hit that thing? Why don't you run some experiments on it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? Like, I mean, it doesn't. I don't even find it. I mean, like I said, there is something kind of offensive about it because it does feel a bit like sneering. But like I said, and I think that this conversation really clarified for that. The thing that you're sneering at isn't even a thing that anybody really wants. Even the people that you think you're offending.
Yeah.
Right. You know, so even on those terms, it doesn't really work as satire because at very least you have to be addressing or poking fun on some level at something that people actually want. Yeah. Right. Like otherwise. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah,
or that is... I don't know, like, that is... I mean... Like, or like even with Mel Brooks and the Nazis, right, at least that was fresh enough that you think, oh yeah, a lot of people were in favor of that, right? A lot of people did want that. So maybe we should look at it through a satirical lens, right?
Yeah.
And, like, the I think that religion in America today is very worthy of satire and very worthy of scrutiny.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with going after those people, right? But
it's a very different.
But it's a different. But like I said, it's different targets. Different. I mean, you know,
different
at
attitudes.
that point, we're talking about like righteous gemstones or something.
Yeah, like that's very good.
Yes, but that's about a thing that exists.
Yes, it does
today.
Yeah.
And is attractive to people today.
Yeah, that is worthy of mockery. That is worthy of satire, and they're doing it for I think more of a purpose than this is, because the people that they are satirizing don't necessarily exist.
Yeah, I mean, even the most, like I said, even the most devout Catholic, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who wanted to return to this iteration of the Catholic Church.
That would be would be shocking.
I mean, it seems to me that the person who is a serious Catholic in this moment, I mean, obviously, you know, you have your dad, for instance. I mean, I don't think even that person is interested in doing like apologetics for the medieval church.
They are not at all.
Right. I mean, that's not really a thing anymore. No. That you'd have to dig into some weird ass
I don't even
corners.
think the more strict form of Benedict Benedict 16th or whatever, it was 16th.
Whatever. But
whatever.
We know him,
Ratzinger. Yeah. Not even he would advocate. Yeah, no.
I mean,
and he was in the more strictest form of what the church wanted in a rule set, and he just that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, no, they go no further back than like Vatican II and like how much. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't live debates about like how modernized the church should be, how tied it should be to tradition, this and that, but it's just not. Like I said, it's not. You know, the fruit here is so low hanging that it's already gone to the ground and gone to seed.
That's I think that's ultimately the problem. And so for me, it was kind of enjoyable for the first hour because of how believable they were, like really getting into the hallucinations and her perspective. But then they lose me when you're like trying to make it this ambiguous sort of criticism, because I'm like, oh, that's easy and it's empty. It's just hollow.
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, all this said, with all those caveats, I mean, maybe you should go see this movie. I mean, I don't regret going to see it.
No, I think it's an interesting.
And I didn't feel. It's interesting though, because you look at Wolf, right, which is like made me feel bad. I don't really feel bad about this movie, but I guess that in a way that's almost kind of a knock on it, because I didn't think it.
It did. Although it certainly did not generate.
I will say this. Part of the reason that I don't feel the same way is because the movie is so kind of over the top that, like, whereas Wolf is a little bit more understated, so I didn't really have it didn't really create any mental space for me to think, oh, well, what could have been? But I guess we are saying a little bit what could have been, because there was like an interest. I do think the idea of like making it just a character study where you take someone at face value,
yeah,
right, on their belief in their own sainthood or whatever, that they're having these visions, that they really did get the stigmata. I mean, that's interesting.
I think so.
I don't know how you play that out, which is probably, and neither did he, but there's something there, right, in a way that there just isn't so much there with the other part. Whereas
I agree.
Whereas I guess with Wolf, it's like the whole thing. You're like, well, there was something there, but it never like at least this movie. I guess to be a flip side and say something positive about Benedetta, there are aspects of this movie where it does realize its potential.
Yes, yeah.
On the whole, it doesn't, but there are significant chunks of it where it realizes what is interesting or at least entertaining about its premise.
There's some wild flourishes. There's some meta considerations. I think one of my favorite parts is where the nuncio informs someone to like do a chord, like a dramatic chord on the organ, like as though to enunciate what is happening within the scene. I'm like, that was a great use of diegetic music, like that they're like informed about, like that's a fun movie joke.
Yes.
And so I like, again, yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, this is not a risible sort of movie, whether it's in provocation or in its existence. I think it is a interesting movie with some wonderful wild flourishes that does not find its ultimate potential. And I think that kind of ambition and that kind of vision gives you a sense that it's a worthwhile experiment, maybe not something that you visit all the time.
Yeah, but I think it's also an interesting cultural relic, right? Because I think that something that artists sort of struggle with in 2021 is how to be provocative.
Yeah, I think that's true.
It's very hard to be provocative because of what we talked about with this movie. What's really offensive to the kind of people who consume whatever we call high culture these days? And how do you reach anybody who would be offended, right? Because we're so bifurcated, right? That, I mean, the idea of Last Temptation of Christ and how it was offensive existed in some sort of mainstream discourse. The discourse itself doesn't exist anymore in this country. Mm-hmm. And insofar as there are conversations, they're completely balkanized. So you can't even get this in front of someone to be upset about it.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Like,
yeah.
You can't even find a way to do that. So how do you?
Well, and
how do you become provocative? I mean, this has been my theory. This is a great, just totally random tangent. Like, I think a lot of the reason, and I did mention him earlier, but I think a lot of the reason Kanye went wrong is because his instinct. And I like Kanye West as a musician. I think his first run of albums is incredible.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. And I think that he has real artistic sense, aesthetic sense, all that. I think that he may well be a genius. But his desire is to be provocative. Mm-hmm. And in his milieu, he looked around and what he saw is supporting Trump, right? Because he was in this Kardashian sort of everyone is kind of nominally liberal. Everyone is kind of nominally a Hillary supporter, right? Even though their politics are whatever, right? I don't know that they really believe in anything, but there's just a kind of knee-jerk sort of cultural liberalism that is very hegemonic, right, in that world. Yeah. And you look around, you think, well, what can I do if I want to get under people's skin? You look at the people around you, you look at the world. Well, yeah, it's easy. Throw on a MAGA hat. It's so obvious. But the problem is, like, that's a mug's game, right? Because you're putting the cart before the horse. Like, the point, you have to have an interesting thing to say or do or think before you get provocative.
Yes.
Like, it's not I'm in favor of provocation. I think it's great to provoke people. But you can't you can't do it very well or effectively or interestingly if that can't be the goal in and of itself, right?
This is where I was going to leap on that and say a figure that I think is being truly, genuinely provocative to the right people, offending the right people, is Lil Nas X.
Yes, that's a great pull.
Yeah.
Because he is very good at it. Yes, and but he's 60 years younger than Verhoeven, right? Verhoeven is, at the end of the day, like everyone in his generation, a product of the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And he wants to be provocative in a way that is known to him.
In the 70s, this movie would have been very fitting.
Absolutely. People would have freaked out.
Yeah.
But like Lil Nas X, although it's funny because I've always said that him and Trump are the two greatest users of social media we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump is, he's an old guy too, but he's a very unique character, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But yes, Lil Nas X is great. He's very good at being provocative, right? He understands how you can make it work in the digital age.
Yeah.
And what he understands is that, well, I don't want to say, I think like I said, I think that he is within that realm a genius.
Yeah.
Right? And the proof's in the pudding on that one. But how does he get in the cultural zeitgeist? Well, he gets in the cultural zeitgeist by essentially understanding how to like game music charts, gets Old Town Road listed as a country song, catapults up those charts, everybody stops and pays attention, and then he's in the conversation.
Yeah.
But you know that he sort of rose to micro prominence as a vocal part of like a Nicki Minaj online fan community, right? Mm-hmm. And so he sort of steeped himself in the mechanics of social media and how to get things to go viral, figured out the way to do it. And so he saw, the using Twitter and social media as like he understands it the way a Swiss person, a Swiss watchmaker understands a watch, right? He sees it as this perfect thing. Yeah. And yes, Verhoeven's paradigm is maybe several iterations behind Lil Nas X's, right? Yeah. He is making a provocation that makes sense in an era of mass culture where cinema predominates as like the serious art form, which of course is what it did in the 80s when Last Temptation came out.
Yeah.
Cinema was the most popular serious art form, right? And now we just live in a complete collage, right? There is no equivalent to what movies were in the later part of the 20th century, which was like movies were at the thing that was at the fulcrum of popular and high culture in the way that nothing else was. It wasn't novels anymore. It was film.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was able, if you were in the right place at the right time with the right shit, it could be a big conversation piece.
Yeah. It
could be something that sort of everyone was aware of and everyone knew about and everybody talked about, and it's a touchstone, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing like that.
Yeah.
That's why like the things that make it like a Lil Nas X, they are kind of all they're not just one thing. It's music, but it's also visual entertainment, but it's also social media. It's like you have to have
like tentacles, like you have to
you got to have a lot of your little fingers and a lot of little pies,
a
lot of different pies, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Verhoeven, he's operating on the old model. I'll make a provocative movie and they'll show it in a theater, right?
Yeah.
And there's no that's not the way it's done today, brother.
It really is not. No, it is an interesting study on that, on the art.
But that's great. That's a great point about Lil Nas X. I feel like
he's offending the right people. I think he's bringing a conversation.
But he can also do it. Like
he can do it. Yeah.
And like it takes a very unique, it's like Liam Neeson Taken situation. You need someone with a special set of skills.
Yeah.
To execute that.
It does show you, like Lil Nas X is having the now cultural battle to instigate and put out provocation to, again, we live in a world where, like, in the 70s, once like Pink Flamingos happened or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it moves the diagram, like it moves the level of offense, pushes it, further to a different degree. And so the desensitization, whether it is to violence or whether it is to sexuality or whether it is to cultural norms, it has been pushed through the last couple of decades to a way that we're having conversations, or it's been legalized in a kind of Supreme Court sense of gay marriage. But I think in the cultural sense, most people, or a really heavy majority, maybe 50+%, do think of it as a harmless sort of kind of degree, which I think 10 years ago we were even having
Yes.
more rabid conversations about it. So Lil Nas X is approaching the right kind of offense to push the diagram, push it again, like we just to make more ground, to have those people be like, oh well, this was offensive, and then once they've been exposed to it, how offensive can it be?
Yes. Yeah, although I like the way you put it, because I think it shows how hard it is, and how. So yeah, where does Lil Nas X come in? He comes in at a point where opinion is sort of broadly on his side, but not completely.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there are plenty of people who might be pro gay marriage but still find him offensive for various reasons.
Yes.
Right? So he's in a space where he's protected enough that he can do it and he can get it out there, but not so protected that it won't generate controversy, and that there aren't plenty of people who disagree, including a fair number of people who find it truly offensive.
Yeah.
But that really speaks to, like I said, it's a narrow moment, right?
Very narrow.
Like you really have to be, like, the moment has to be specific, and you have to be very specific to the moment for it to work.
Yeah.
It's not just something that you can, just generally be like, oh, here's something fucked up, right? I'm gonna show him something fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, and it really goes back to that second question, which is the big question. It's not about whether it's offensive. It's about whether anyone gives a shit.
Yeah.
That's the big question.
It is the big question.
Because I can come up with a million offensive things right now.
I bet we could.
but who's gonna give a shit?
Yeah.
Right? Who's gonna give a shit? And also, what would I be willing to follow through on, right? In terms of doing an actual provocation. Like, we still do have a few taboos, right? Like, child sex or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm not gonna follow through with a provocation about that, because that's fucking horrifying. Yeah. Right? So, like, what's something that would actually work that I would actually do? Right?
I mean, you could probably get funding from NAMBLA or whatever.
So you so rarely. I remember when NAMBLA was the thing that you would sign someone up for their newsletter if you hated them.
If you hated them, yeah.
That was what NAMBLA was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look it up, kids, if you want to dip into one of the many bizarre features of the world that sort of is in the early internet days.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we did that one.
I think so.
I feel like we did that one justice.
I really liked how you put it, that provocation only matters if people care, and because
otherwise it's a tree falling in a forest.
Yeah,
right?
or if it fell on a mime, whether it's whether you heard a sound or not.
Yeah.
It really does bring to the idea of that conversation, because when I watched it, I'm like, okay, this is provocative to a certain pearl clutcher, but it's not to me. Challenge like my sensibilities too, as somebody who would be willing to go see this. Don't congratulate me for seeing this. That is so boring. I had the same reaction, and I might offend people if they listen to the whole thing, with Titane, the Palme d'Or winner. I found it wanting to be provocative in a sense. I think it does it better than Benedetta, but I also found it empty in the end. I also found it oh, you're provoking people that will not see this. You're provoking people, and I feel like the people who celebrate these kinds of movies and don't really think about it, what I'm saying, they yearn for the time that people were insulted by movies.
It's all this 60s romanticism.
They want this. They have this sort of Damocles over their head.
They want to think of some moment where, they could I don't know, where people would hear "Howl" by Allen Ginsberg and lose their fucking mind or something like that. Yeah. And it's good luck with that. Good luck reading this shit to the person who's going to care. Yeah, I mean, but both of these movies we reviewed today suffered from one similar problem, right? Which is that they don't have a strong antithesis.
Yeah.
If you have a thesis, that's great, what's the antithesis? If the antithesis isn't also powerful, you're not going to get anything interesting, right?
No.
Like there's no interesting question about whether like torturing people because they think they're a dog is okay. There's no interesting question about whether like they should torture, Bartolomea, right? That's not anything interesting.
Just
question.
to get out a confession.
Yeah, of course they should.
Which essentially is,
of course they shouldn't.
I mean, you could have the comparative sense of utilizing torture for on Guantanamo today, but the Card Counter, Paul Schrader's movie, had a much more interesting thing to say about that.
I think, but there again, like talk about thesis and antithesis, right? Like the people who tortured people in the wake of 9/11 in America, and like I have strong views about this.
Yeah,
but they believed like they were going to save us from the next 9/11. A lot of them believed that.
They did.
Now you can go down into the heart of darkness as far as you want about what happened and what they did, and the kind of darkness it reveals about them too. But like at least there's like there's an antithesis, right?
There is.
Like you have and the problem is that the antitheses that people might believe in a movie like Benedetta, nobody believes anymore. Nobody believes that confessing is required to save your eternal soul.
No.
And I don't want to say nobody. Nobody's going to watch the movie believes it. Nor does anyone believe that like the Catholic Church is like worth saving in its present form.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the form
in this film.
Right.
Yeah.
Like nobody's going to watch this movie and think like, oh well, that's a powerful counterweight against our obvious dislike of torturing people. Whereas like you can find plenty of people who think like, well, would you torture someone to prevent the next 9/11? Would say, sure, of course I would.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people who think that.
There's plenty.
Right. So like the counterweight is much stronger. Like if you have no ballast to hold down your thesis and to make it interesting to think about, then it's just like, well, yeah, I too think that we shouldn't torture people for being lesbians.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, the things it brings up, I think are just not that interesting because, like you said, the counterweight doesn't exist because it is so slanted in a mockery and judgment that it has nothing interesting to say. And so, ultimately, you're right. Both of these movies suffer from similar problems. I thought this was good. I thought this was a good conversation. I got a lot out of it actually today. Boom. That was very fun.
I'll pick up my meal voucher on the way out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna do 2 more episodes next week. It sounds like.
Apparently, we're good.
We'll spread it out. I have a lot more free time next week.
Oh,
so,
good. So we're
gonna
see movies.
Yeah, I'll be seeing.
Keep you up to date.
We'll keep you up to date. I think we're gonna do an episode on West Side Story and Red Rocket. I think that would be a nice kind of counterbalance, watch and conversation. And then we've got Adam McKay's being panned right now satire, and I'm not necessarily looking forward to watching a 2.5-hour comedy called Don't Look Up. But
I think we can stream that one though. I will be streaming that.
Is it come immediately on Netflix? It might be.
I think it's. You can see it right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe.
Well, then,
or soon.
I might go to a theater to watch it, but we'll see. And then we got Aaron Sorkin's Being the Ricardos coming out as well.
You know what's funny? I didn't even know that was Sorkin until like yesterday.
It's Sorkin.
I knew that it existed before I knew that our buddy Aaron was behind it.
Aaron.
Yeah, we haven't even talked. People. I don't know. Maybe what are we gonna do with Drive My Car? We're gonna have to figure.
I mean, I loved it.
You've seen it?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay.
I did see it.
Well, maybe we'll figure out something. I mean, that's getting some.
That's
getting some noise.
It is fantastic. I think you'd love it.
Yeah, I gotta see it, but then I gotta slip one of the new underwear.
Yeah, it's a lot.
This is bonus content.
This is bonus content.
Talking about I gotta drive. We're gonna be like the Californians. Like I gotta take the 405.
Yeah, gotta do all that.
But drop my ass off and
you should we'll try and see what we can fit in but
we're gonna have some year-end chats where we'll maybe be able to talk about some movies
but some that we didn't overtly talk about but next week cinephile
so up to date.
Absolutely next week two more episodes but look out for that and thanks for joining us.
Thanks.